Welcome back, everyone. This is Alfredo with Teach for Justice. We are on season 1, episode 7, and this is going to be a recap of April 2022 in the news. If this is the first time listening, we are using 2022 to answer the question or explore the question, what does it mean to teach for justice? This is one teacher, me, and my journey to try to understand that question and really look at the ways in which social, cultural, economic, and certainly political conditions right now are affecting teachers and students, and hopefully provide some kind of perspective to people who are either in the teaching profession but not really looking at how it's affecting us nationwide, and certainly people who aren't in the teaching profession trying to understand how we're impacted by much of what's going on here. All right, let's get going here. This is going to be a tough episode, and we're going to start with something that happened right at the beginning of April. And I just want to warn some of you that this is, so far in this series, really the toughest story I've tried to cover. All right. We are in Chicago Public Schools. We are at Whitney Young Magnet High School in Chicago, which is a high-performing public school, if you're not aware of Whitney Young. And what happened was a teacher found a doll left behind. The doll happened to be dark-skinned, and it was a doll of the doll was representing a black football player. It had a football uniform on and helmet. The teacher then took the projector screen cord and put the string around the doll's neck, as you can see in the image if you're watching on YouTube, and hung the doll with the cord around its neck, several feet off the ground, and basically left it there and walked out of the room. There's a lot of layers to this, and if you can't see it, good, because you might be thinking to yourself, and we've been hearing this a lot lately, well, it's not a real person. It's not an image of a human being being, and I know, I'm confronted and certainly conflicted with whether or not I want to use the term lynched. I mean, can you lynch a doll? Certainly the imagery is difficult. If it's something that affects you, if you're a kid who knows that in your background, people used to lynch African Americans, then that imagery is very difficult to see, even in, regardless of the context. White teacher, Carl Pasowitz. And what happened was, a teacher of color, through some investigation, research, or Googling, it looks like a black teacher confronted Carl Pasowitz, who did this. And as it turns out these days, everybody's got a phone. And so a kid caught the audio. And as you can imagine, the black teacher was officially upset, and words were exchanged. Foul language was involved, and there was a confrontation. I don't know specifically what was said. A picture of it ended up going viral, as you can see here if you're watching on YouTube, or if you can click on the links provided here. But I have a lot of questions, and I have a lot of concerns here. Okay. Obviously, the questions are, what kind of teacher makes a move like this at a school that has its fair share of students of color, right? What mindset can you possibly be in to think this is okay? I've been teaching over 20 years. I've probably met guys like this. I've worked with guys like this. Okay. But they were at least a little more low key than this particular teacher here in this moment, which is beyond frustrating. I haven't really been angry up to this point. If you've been following this entire podcast, on this one, I'm having trouble not using foul language here, and I've done my best up to this point not to, but this one is really pushing some of those buttons for me. Basic Google searches will reveal not a whole lot coming from Chicago Public Schools or from Mr. Pasowitz himself, but many of us have worked with guys like this. And hopefully, if you're a teacher of color who's working at a school where you're in the minority, and I've been there too, right? I've been in the room where people are bashing the concept of teaching, ethnic studies or separating some kind of cultural group and saying, well, how about we have a history course of just that? Or, why do we include or don't include certain events in history and think all that stuff. This person is different. And, without getting into psychoanalyzing this guy, all I can say is I've worked with guys like this, right? And I can only imagine either he knows people in the district and doesn't fear any repercussion. He truly has these values and doesn't fear repercussion. Okay. He's close to retirement, doesn't fear repercussion, or, somehow his family might have money. And if he loses his job, it's not the end of the world. But there's certainly a comfort level there combined with his beliefs that this is acceptable that created this situation. If I flip it, because this is sort of my, I'm doing this podcast to ask myself, what does it mean to teach for justice? I want to be very clear. This is not it. But what would I do in this situation? Imagine you're a teacher. What would you do if you heard students super upset and walked by this classroom and saw an image of a black doll being hung by the projector screen? And you've got a strong contingent of African-American students. Would you say something? And I can, to be vulnerable and enough, for me, the answer is it depends. It depends on when in my career. Today, I would certainly say something. Earlier in my career, I might not have, and I've certainly been, like I had mentioned earlier, in the room where I am one of two persons of color in a department meeting of 11, and there's certainly not the open-mindedness and flexibility, certainly cultural sensitivity that I would hope for. And so kudos to you, colleague, who was not going to take this and stood up for what was clearly wrong. So a question is going to become, and you can, if you don't want to look it up, I'll go ahead and walk you through it here. What happened? Well, next article here is CPS, Chicago Public Schools, removed the teacher who hung the doll from the cord in the classroom. What does removed mean? And this is where it's a little gray, it's a little murky here. Was he fired? I wasn't able to find anything that definitively stated whether or not the individual was fired. I did try to go to their teacher staff page, and the picture was not available. Other teachers' pictures are available. Mr. Pasowitz's image was not available. Okay. And what I've included here also on the screen for those of you looking at YouTube is it did make the local news. It made Fox 32, Chicago, and you can see an image there, and I'll link to a video of it, of a reporter covering it. Now, what the reporter said was that they had talked to some kids, and the kids came right out and said that this particular teacher had a history of making problematic comments that made the students uncomfortable. And so I stop here at this point of the story, partly because I'm frustrated, right? In 22, 2022, this is the year that I've been really trying to focus in on teachers across the country and how stuff like this affects us. I have found a large majority of people saying, on one hand, trust the teachers. They got us through pandemic. Trust the teachers, right? Great job, teachers. On the other hand, I'm finding people who are saying, oh, teachers are indoctrinating these kids with cultural stuff. And, teachers right here in April 2022 has been kind of the start of some of this language of teachers are grooming kids, which is really an aggressive accusation that could be career ending. But the word grooming is being thrown around by teachers who are trying to be culturally responsive here in April 2022. And then you have guys like this. And so if you're an adult without kids and you're a voter and 2022 is a primary year, you're asking yourself, depending on where you get your news from, you're asking yourself, right? Are teachers bad? Are teachers good? I'm getting mixed messages here. Well, incidents like this do not help the rest of us. And it's an incident like this, right? Empathize, for example, with cops, right? Who might be in a department where one officer did something terrible and it's reflecting on the officer. I don't have enough information here to say that this is a systematic problem with Chicago public schools, but there's a problem with this individual. This individual should not be, in my opinion, around young people if in his brain this is a good decision, right? My thoughts on this. All right, now moving on. What's going to be the outcome? Well, the principal, Joyce Kenner, is, after 3 decades at the school, is retiring at the end of this year. To me, having been in education for 20 years, although not in the Chicago area, this could potentially mean that there will not be a firing. If the principal is stepping away, my experience has been the principal is going to leave it up to either the school board, the superintendent, or the next principal to try to figure out what to do with this particular teacher. And so I'm following it to see what Chicago Public Schools considers justice in this situation. Now, student response. As you can see here, if you're watching on YouTube, it didn't come up. A change.org petition was started. There's over 1,000 signatures on it. A student started it, and in that change.org petition, there was a list of anecdotal, which the kid actually said, hey, these are anecdotes, but this is what I gathered from my peers. Other problematic issues with this particular teacher, and they've got over 1,000 signatures so far. And so I encourage you, if change.org petitions are something you routinely sign or you're interested in, or if this story has really gotten under your skin to find it and sign that petition, help these kids out and potentially get on the radar of the superintendent and the school board or the new principal and have some accountability for this particular decision. All right, moving on. Brookline, Massachusetts. This next story has to do with not necessarily a teacher strike, but the threat of a strike. Okay, so these teachers were in a contract negotiation, and they certainly had a couple of events where they were trying to draw some awareness to their contract. And so, if we're looking at the economic aspect of how teachers are affected, there's been a lot of strikes this year, folks. There's been a lot of strikes this year. And those strikes are reminding me here to draw attention to the fact that in different parts of this country, hey, teachers are underpaid. Teachers are underpaid. And so in different parts of the country coming out of pandemic, how does the local school board and parents feel about teachers saying, hey, we got through this. We dug in. We showed you who we are. And we showed you that your kids are important to us. Hook us up. To have to stand out there and protest, to have to go to school board meetings, to have to use your free time and stand out there in the Brooklyn, in the Boston or Brookline, Massachusetts cold, to push for a fair contract is necessary, but gosh darn it, it shouldn't be necessary. Looking forward to seeing how the Brookline teachers get their contract situation resolved. Moving on, another teacher strike here. Calexico. If you didn't know where Calexico was, I got a map on here for those of you watching on YouTube, but Calexico is a border town, the southern part of California. So it's not only down here at the southern part of California bordering Mexico, but it's very much to the eastern part of the border, so more towards Arizona. Okay, and Calexico is, the word is even a mixture of California and Mexico. But they've got a superintendent who is out, and they got a new one coming in, and teachers are also very concerned about who that's going to be, as well as advocating for their own new contract. And so yet another in a series of what's becoming a trend. And prior to this year, I didn't follow teacher strikes. Okay, but it's feeling like to me that every month where I'm trying to cover education in the news, there's 2 or 3 teacher strikes, not even limited to a particular region, all over this country, as well as student walkouts for that matter. And so Calexico teachers, I'll be interested to see how that wraps up for you guys as well. Good luck to you. Next, in an earlier episode, we talked about Oakland Unified Teachers threatening to go on strike, going on strike. They had their board of directors and their principals had gotten together and they had announced closures of school. This is the district that had the teacher who went on a hunger strike as well. Ashley McBride was the reporter, journalist in that area who was doing amazing coverage. Well, as I had updated you earlier, there was a resolution to the strike and the contract negotiations, but according to the follow-through, right, the people who are supposed to follow through, the school workers in that union are saying that the district is going back on the agreement. So they were here at the end of April talking about doing a one-day walkout where the teachers walked out during school. Okay. And there was a message here by the district. We demand, it's up here on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, we demand that OEA, Oakland Educators Association, immediately cease and desist from moving forward with this strike. A one-day strike would hurt the district financially. Why would it hurt the district financially? For those of you not in education, let me explain quickly. And I've posted it here on the screen for YouTube. It's because of this thing called average daily attendance, also known as the acronym ADA. Schools get paid from the state based on their average daily attendance. Okay. And so this is one of the reasons why certain schools really push kids to show up, and they have all of these consequences for absences and things like that. So average daily attendance, if it's high, translates to more money. So there is a financial cost to the district for teachers walking out and students walking out on a school day. So they're concerned, their motivation here, their incentive here to ask the teachers not to have a walkout on a school day is financial, and they just really give up the game here when they come right out and say it. So Oakland teachers, I hope this gets resolved. We will be watching for you, and rooting for you as well. If they tell you they're going to do something, they need to follow through. Teachers deserve honest, sincere, and authentic people in these negotiations. And so what I did about Oakland, which leads me to my next sort of story, or at least referring back to an old article, which I'm going to link here for you in the notes. In March of 2019, I found an article. It was published in a journal called EdSource, not a journal, an online magazine called EdSource. And Louis Friedberg wrote this article in March 3rd, 2019, and it says lessons from the Los Angeles and Oakland teacher strikes. So as recently as 2019, LA Unified and Oakland were striking again. And so I thought this was an interesting find while I was looking for more information on the current Oakland strike. And I want to pull a couple of points out here from Mr. Friedberg. One, and I'm quoting, in both strikes, demands went beyond those more typical of labor strikes, which tend to focus on wages and benefits. Those were on the table, but equally important were a range of other issues, including lowering class sizes, providing more counselors, psychologists, nurses, and other support staff, limiting school closures in Oakland, and creating community schools in Los Angeles. Both contracts also included provisions tied to regulating charter schools. It's and a little bit further in the article, it skips a bit and then says, unaddressed in both Oakland and Los Angeles here in 2019 are deeper structural issues, such as the impact of declining enrollments, the crushing costs of meeting pension obligations, and stratospheric housing costs. Whether these underlying forces will trigger further strikes, still a relatively rare event in California, is hard to predict. And as we are here in 2022, and you got this guy and his podcast looking at teachers in 2022, we can see 3-ish years later, strikes are not rare in California. Housing prices are still even more, he referred to them as stratospheric here. It's worse now. Okay. And so after 3 years, what have we learned? And it doesn't look like we've learned a ton. And the prediction of further strikes has come true. So Mr. Friedberg, well done, sir, on predicting that one. So on the podcast here, when we do these recaps of monthly news events, we try to end on a good note. This month was a little tough, partly because I was so distracted by the hanging doll, or the lynched doll here that we had to open with in Chicago public schools. But I'm going to end with this group of students here who decided to start a website tracking both teacher strikes and student walkouts across the country to have a resource on 2022 so that people can go back or people can currently look and add to it and say, my school went on walkout or our teachers went on strike, so that we can see any similarities and differences, track the trends, or just sit back and say, wow, teachers and students are really being affected. And this is, make a claim like this is a major problem that is going with little to no attention. I, of course, blame the fact that teachers' unions and school districts don't advertise heavily on mainstream media, so we're not going to get the coverage. And if we got the coverage, it would be very, very minimal. It certainly wouldn't have the nuance or be given the time to say, this is happening all over the place. But you can go here, and I'll include the link, and find at least the student walkouts and teacher strikes that were findable on basic Google searches and some social media. searches, and start piecing it together, start getting maybe a clearer picture on the fact that it's not just happening to you in your area or these kinds of students, or it's not just happening in this area. It's not just conservative areas or wealthy areas or poor areas. It's bigger than that. So good for these kids for putting this together. And if you want to add your strike or walkout to it, I will attach a Google form to submit to add to there. So I don't know, folks. This wraps it up for this episode here for April in the news. We've got a couple of threatened strikes and contract negotiations. We've got some students trying to track it, and we've got a teacher who thought it would be acceptable, or at least we thought that he was confident enough to hang a doll from the projector cord that he wasn't going to get in too much trouble. And even if he did, he'd be what? At home getting paid? And I don't know where he got his confidence from on that, but I also want to highlight the teacher that challenged him on it, the students that recorded it, and the students that took the picture and made it go viral to hold this individual accountable. I can assure you folks listening that aren't in education that most of us would not do that. 99.99999% of us would absolutely not even think of doing that. This is an individual who obviously has some major issues and should not be around kids, and does not represent the rest of us. Looking forward to next interview coming up here, as well as covering what's going on in May. Now, May could get crazy because it's the end of the year. It's been the end of a long year, what has felt like the longest year in a long time. And so it will be interesting to see when people are getting close to the finish line, how they let some of the pressure off. Okay, but it's also AP testing is in May for many school districts. If they're having like benchmarks or state testing in their state, it's going to be happening in May. So we'll stay tuned here to see how everybody reacts to that. I really appreciate you guys that have been listening. If it's a year from now or a couple of years from now, I still appreciate you taking a look at what a crazy year this was up to this point here in April. And I'm looking forward to putting some more interviews and some more recaps here together for you. Thank you. From Teacher of Justice. I will see you guys soon.